Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It's a great honor of us to have this side event in the Mediterranean Pavilion. The subject of this side event is about the climate change and the Mediterranean. The main subject is to accelerating the joint efforts in our common homeland Mediterranean. Um, I want to say some words about the COP27. We have a great participation over 190 countries, and participants are more than 50,000. First of all, I would like to give some information. The Turkey's effort that we performed, I mean the activities in the scope of the COP. As Turkey, we performed about 80 side events in Turkish Pavilion. And I would like to say also in the Met Pavilion, they have 80 valuable side events. And the message was clear. There is a very close relationship between Mediterranean and climate change. The message is we have to combat with the climate change and we have to adapt ourselves to these effects to save Mediterranean as a whole. Before continuing with our distinguished panelists, I would like to give some brief information about our common problem, about the climate change. Now we say it's a crisis. Surely, let me stress that climate change is a development and security problem of our Mediterranean, not only an environmental problem. Mediterranean suffers from climate change with issues like floods, forest fires, heavy rains, drought, and continuously. Before each COP organization, UNFCCC, countries, academicians, NGOs, I mean all the stakeholders, publish important reports about the actual studies of the Mediterranean region. So UNESCO reported the World Heritage Glaciers stated that we will not see glaciers of many known places like Kilimanjaro, Swiss Alps, and Yellowstone. Now, as a being head of Bureau of Barcelona Convention as Turkey, we are here about to talk about our Mediterranean. Since it is already one of the 25 hotspots impacted by the climate change in the world. It hosts 180 million people in the basin and around 9% of the world's biodiversity. And it represents less than 1% of the global ocean surface. It hosts a great biodiversity and lots of population. MEDEX states that multiple substances, including plastics, emerging contaminants, heavy metals, fecal bacteria, viruses, all with expected increase in the future, heavily pollute the Mediterranean Sea, unfortunately. Marwan report also says that Mediterranean is one of the most polluted large water bodies globally in terms of plastics and the other pollutants. We can also mention sea level rise, air pollution, non-indigenous species, food and energy problems caused by depopulation, and ecosystem loss and acidification are some of the main problems of the Mediterranean region. So at this point, I would like to introduce our panelists. Mrs. Tatiana Hema, the director of the UNEP MAP Barcelona Convention, is here with us today. And Professor Dr. Hakan Karan, chair of the board of directors of Ankara University National Center for the Sea and Maritime Law. I will start with Mrs. Hema. Let me introduce Mrs. Hema. She is specialized in environmental management and technologies. She joined to United Nations in 2003 and now she's the coordinator of the UNEP MAP since 2016. Now I would like to ask that, as the Barcelona Convention being one of the most successful most successfully implemented regional sea conventions, what is the actual condition of the Mediterranean facing climate change problem, and how UNEP MAP system is working to overcome this problem?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Nazan, for this interesting side event on this very important subject for the region, which is climate change. And thank you very much for the nice words about UNEP MAP Barcelona Convention as one of the most successful regional conventions in terms of implementation. Now, climate change, as you already said, and without repeating, a lot of evidence that has come through different reports that have been prepared by our own system, or also Mediterranean chapter of the IPCC report. Mediterranean is a climate change hotspot. And it's already identified that it warms 20% faster than the global average. And if no action is taken and the situation will continue as it is, definitely more severe consequences will affect the region in terms of sea level rise, as you said, a number of environmental disasters, fires, flooding. It will be also impacting the economic development, aquaculture, fisheries, agriculture. So it's something that we really need to consider in a very serious way. Now, I'm not, as I said, taking time because there is a lot of evidence about what is climate change. What does it mean, climate change in the Mediterranean? Now, from our perspective, UNEP MAP has addressed climate change from the very beginning, even at a time when it was not that obvious by the other programs and organizations in the region or even at global level. We looked at it from the vulnerability perspective since '95. There are interesting studies undertaken at the time by MedPol. I'm talking about '95. And then little by little every year the portfolio grew very much because we handle different aspects of the environmental management of sea and coast. And definitely today I think the map is quite well equipped with the work on assessing the drivers on climate change, proposing solutions, guiding some technical work and guidelines. And I think that what MAP has done well is the streamlining of climate change in the planning phase. From the regulatory perspective, climate change is well mentioned and articulated in the IZM protocol of the Barcelona Convention that was adopted several years ago. From a programmatic point of view, climate change is a very clear priority in the midterm strategy of MAP 2022-2027, articulated in a very clear way, stronger than in the past. From technical point of view, I already said that there are a number of guidelines that have been elaborated by the system supporting the contracting parties to take into consideration climate change in several aspects of the work of UNEP MAP. And from the strategic perspective, several years ago we did the parties adopted the regional strategic framework on adaptation to climate change in the Mediterranean. And we also do address climate change in the Mediterranean strategy for sustainable development, and we plan to upgrade the Mediterranean strategy for sustainable development in the next biennium, plus the regional adaptation strategy. So the framework in a way is complete, and definitely we also try to mobilize resources in supporting different countries in addressing climate change. There are different projects, but I will refer in particular those that have been funded from GEF, because there are several contracting parties which are beneficiary to GEF project, and we always have made possible that this kind of resources from GEF are allocated to the Mediterranean countries. Now, the only issue that I would like to mention, you already mentioned this, Nazan, is that at the last meeting of the contracting parties in Antalya, Turkey, it was very clear that the parties drew the attention that we have to handle pollution, prevention, and plastic pollution in particular, with a focus on marine litter, climate change and biodiversity loss in an integrated way. So we are not going to win the battle that are in front of us to achieving sustainable development goals, to achieve good environmental status, if we are not in a position to work together and addressing in an integrated way the three main aspects: pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change. So this I wanted to say from the UNEP MAP Barcelona Convention perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sama, for your explanations and for your great effort to preserve our Mediterranean. I mentioned before, Barcelona is one of the most successful regional sea conventions. I would like to express a decision that we take at the last COP in Antalya. We, as all contracting parties, said that at least 30% of marine areas should be designated as the marine protection area. We have the decision now. Some larger scale international initiatives is underway, and since the marine environment is one of the most important carbon sink in terms of climate change, since microplastics makes higher surface temperature in the seawater temperature in the marine ecosystem, we have lots of opportunities to have good environmental status in the Mediterranean, and every effort will also contribute to mitigation to climate change. We have a good progress in this issue, and we need more. So at this stage, we need more academic studies and contribution of academicians about the marine environment. At this point, I would like to give floor to Professor Karan. I would like to give some information about him. He has been working as professor in the Faculty of Law of Ankara University since 2011. He is specialized in the field of law of maritime. He is also the chairman of the board of the National Center for the Sea and Maritime Law of Ankara University. I would like to ask you that how would you summarize the legal regime related to protection of marine environments of the Mediterranean from the perspective of international law of sea? And what would you like to offer in order to mitigate and tackle the climate change problem that we are facing in the Mediterranean basin?
Thank you very much for your question. First of all, I'd like to express my sincere thanks for the invitation to be part of this side event. Coming to the question, I must say that yesterday, I'm repeating myself with my presentation in yesterday, but almost 70% of the world consists of sea. And there is just one sea and just one marine environment. So there is a need for global attention to protect the maritime area or maritime or marine environment right now. So this is very important. But in order to protect the marine environment, of course, we need the global attention through the international agreements, global agreements especially. The main agreement right now which exists is the UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, 1982, and especially part 12 of the UNCLOS, dealing with the protection of marine environment. But when we look at the UNCLOS, it approaches to the issue from the perspective of the pollution, either from the land-based or from the shipping side. So, but there is no reference to the climate change at all in the UNCLOS. This is not the one just because of the climate change, but also there are some other issues like the preservation of biodiversity. So they all fall within, not fall within the scope of the UNCLOS, but there are some needs to cooperate and collaborate and giving effect to some new instruments in future. But the UNCLOS also encourages and obliges states to cooperate and collaborate on a regional basis as well. So because of that, especially in the semi-enclosed or enclosed seas, like the Mediterranean Sea, like the Black Sea, all the coastal states are obliged to get together and then to speak about their own problems and concerns relating to the sea, especially for the protection of marine environment. So the Barcelona Convention or the Bucharest Convention, one with the Mediterranean Sea, the another one is with the Black Sea, they are there to assist this aim. And because of the Barcelona Convention, all the coastal states are now obliged to give enough attention to the protection of marine environment in the Mediterranean area right now. So this is a very good source. But at the same time, something is missing in the Barcelona Convention because there is no reference to the climate change. Does it mean that the Barcelona Convention does not deal directly or indirectly the protection of marine environment regarding the climate change? My answer is no. I mean, of course, it does fall within the scope. The climate change does fall within the scope of the Barcelona Convention, even though there is no wording in the Barcelona Convention. Because under normal circumstances, the terms, the articles, the provisions of any convention should be interpreted considering the new developments, new changes in the world, in the social life, economic life, or technological life. So because of that, when we look at the ministerial declarations or the COP decisions, we find some references to the climate change in the Barcelona Convention. So this is a good thing. But is it enough? I must say it's not enough, but there is a good starting regarding the Barcelona Convention. Coming to the climate change in general, of course, all you know much better than me, maybe sometimes. There are some global conventions, especially when we talk about the United Nations Framework Convention on the Climate Change. And just because of this convention, we've got Kyoto Convention, Kyoto Protocol, and then Paris Agreement, and then on a regional basis, with respect to especially for our area, is the European Green Deal, for example. They could be referred for the protection of marine environment just with respect to the climate change. So these are the ones I just would like to touch upon, but from my point of view, the protection of marine environment and the climate change are interrelated to each other, but there is a missing something in this. There is a gap. We need to find another instrument which we may fill in this gap in future. That's all I'd like to say right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karan, for these valuable explanations and analysis that you made in terms of law and implementation of Mediterranean. The involvement of academicians to the process, as I mentioned, give us a chance of being science-based in terms of decision making, but it is not the one. Another importance is that you will not leave youth behind, because for the education, for the rising awareness of the youth, academicians' involvement of academia is very important, and thank you very much. And at this point, I want to mention an initiative about the youth in terms of climate change that we performed in Turkey. We organized training activities to raise awareness in many age groups, and we have selected climate ambassadors between university students. We now have one climate ambassador from each university. There are also some are also attended this scope and performed together with the other youth coming from the other countries, and increase their awareness, and they learned collaboration and cooperation. At this point, I would like to mention we had some local, national studies, but the main aim as a president of the bureau also to increase the collaboration and cooperation between countries in regional and global level. So I would like to come back to Mrs. Hema. What would you like to say about future steps in the UNEP MAP system? Any protocol, detailed action and implementation plans, maybe, and new instruments for the adaptation and transition to circular economy and climate change?
Thank you very much, Naz. Yeah, I did mention that from the programmatic and policy perspective, what we have planned in the current midterm strategy is to revise the regional strategy on adaptation to climate change, to revise the Mediterranean strategy for sustainable development, and those two important processes may open the door to a further reflection based on what the professor said. I think that we are very grateful to have scientific community and academic community to come out with ideas, because the beauty of the MAP system is that it didn't stay the same as it was adopted 50 years ago. It started as a program focusing on integrated planning with a focus on pollution, but then little by little the parties committed to a protocol on especially protected areas, to a protocol addressing land-based source of pollution, to a protocol addressing offshore. The convention was revised substantively in 95. Several protocols were also revised in this spirit. So the beauty of the MAP system is that contracting parties look at it in a very evolving way, and I'm very confident then after a careful review, whatever argument may come in, they will be the one to take the right decision for the system, absolutely. So the door is open. Now, I understood from the colleague that yes, a legal instrument might be a protocol, it might be something else. This is a subject, this decision is a big one if it has to be taken, and requires the time, the reflection, inclusiveness, which means that to be open. So it's very interesting. So I cannot say at this stage anything, but definitely it is in the spirit of the MAP Barcelona Convention to be innovative and to adjust in order to cope with the challenges that are in front of us. We also have a very different and an interesting approach that has been followed, I would like to mention, for under the LBS protocol. LBS protocol is a very important one addressing main sectors that would affect marine and coastal environment. However, at the time when the protocol amendment were adopted, the parties were not ready at that time in order to go sector by sector and to decide on legally binding measures. But what they did say is that time to time the parties, they decide on legally binding measures. And this is what we have done. We have legally binding measures on marine litter. We have legally binding measures on wastewater treatment plan. We have several measures. And what we are doing at this stage with regard to climate change is to make sure that we do streamline climate change in those legally binding measures. And is also a finding from the MAR1 report, or MEDEC report, when I'm used to call it, that it's important, and something that the parties have already committed is that while we define new policy instruments or measures that we want to address, we cannot ignore any longer climate change. We cannot. It is important for us, which is difficult, it's not easy. This is why that we need a scientist, academician, technical people to tell us on how to design those technical measures in order to address pollution prevention or pollution reduction or biodiversity protection that would allow us also to consider climate change. So, as we said, issues are open. We are open to hear how we can do it better and better. What is important from our perspective is that we definitely, it's our duty to consider. Now we have also a very clear commitment, I would say, and understanding on agreement on what nature-based solutions are. And I believe that there is a room for us as MAP Barcelona Convention to further reflect and to define how we are going to implement in the system and to build capacity of the system on nature-based solution that would allow us to define those technical measures that we said or whatever, and also consider climate change. So this is overall what is in our in our current plans. But as we said, the system has been always open to be innovative, and why not in the right moment, the right time, with the necessary rationale. If this kind of proposal come to the parties, I'm very confident that we'll give due consideration. Of course, we'll take the best decision for the region and for the MAP system.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mrs. Sema. At this point, the efforts of UNEP MAP is very valuable, and also there is additional efforts of UNEP. There is a resolution that was the product of the UNEA 5.2. Now UNEP is working on a new convention considering plastic pollution, including marine environment, considers the management of waste and circular economy and marine litter together. As Turkey, we are very happy to have such a kind of effort. And I would like to express then one way to mitigate with the climate change is to find a way to consume less. Consuming less also includes consuming less raw materials, so using waste as an alternative raw material. At this point, I would like to emphasize that as Turkey, we have lots of efforts to manage especially plastic waste, to conserve marine environment from plastics, because as we are all familiar, 80% of marine litter are plastics. So we are facing with very dangerous crisis in terms of having lots of marine litter and microplastics, and it will affect the marine ecosystem. At this point, I would like to express our green development measures of Turkey, considering the waste and low carbon economy. Turkey has taken important steps to achieve its long-term climate goal, includes all of these aspects I mentioned, and includes transition to low carbon economy, and 2053 is our net zero target. Turkey's emphasis on the inclusive, sustainable and human nature of development is among the main features our country's green development revolution. At this COP, we also announced our NDC. Therefore, Turkey's development vision does not consider climate change as a threat, but as an opportunity. Supporting the transition from a linear to circular economy is also a part of this. As stated in the Paris Agreement, we will prepare our national climate finance strategy. It will serve to align financial flows with low carbon and climate resilient development. And diversity of financing instruments such as green bonds, green lease certificates, green mortgages stands out in the global financial market. Turkey will continue to encourage financial institutions and organizations to use such financing instruments. It will help diversify and expand their existing investor base. I mean the new financial mechanisms and tools. Another principle of our national climate change strategy is to develop national research, development and innovation capacities towards cleaner production. As Mrs. Hema said, cleaner production is one of the important issues during combating climate change. In order to achieve that goal, Turkey supports all of the stakeholders, academia, sectors, non-governmental organizations, by projects and studies. At this point, I would like to ask you, Mr. Karan, considering the current trends mentioned about, can you explain what will be the contribution of a new subsidiary body, mainly named as Regional Activity Center, in the UNEP MAP, especially to combat with climate change problem in the Mediterranean? in order to coordinate all of the issues that we mentioned together.
Thank you very much for the question again. Firstly, from my point of view, there is we need a new means or new instrument which facilitates the harmonization of Barcelona Convention with other international instruments or international agreements relating to climate change. So there could be so many suggestions, recommendations from each other's understanding. But from my understanding, there is a possibility to establish a RAC, a Regional Activity Center, to work on this. Especially, we need more studies, more researches to conduct on the climate change for the protection of marine environment in the Mediterranean region. Without the scientific data, scientific studies, it's quite difficult to reach the common understanding very easily and to set up some kind of policies on this matter. So we need to understand the Mediterranean for the sake of climate change. But at the same time, we are aware of the fact that there are some other wrecks in the area, in the Mediterranean Sea. So this new wreck could not compete with the existing wrecks, but just to complement their works in such a way as to harmonize all the works just because of the protection of marine environment relating to the climate change. So this is going to be the good approach to unify, to harmonize all the works done together with the other RACs as well. Just because of the activities to be conducted by this new RAC, so then the cooperation and collaboration is going to be not only with the RACs under the UNEP MAP system, but also with other RACs in the world, doing research, doing studies relating to climate change. So it's going to be the good way to settle that. Maybe after all these studies, after all these researches, we'll find out that there is going to be need for a new international instrument, which could be a protocol as a part of the Barcelona Convention. But firstly, there is a need for scientific and academic works, and then we'll carry out what we are going to do on the issue. That's all I'd like to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karan. At this point, I would like to mention that Mediterranean is very fragile to climate change. Today, we need more precautionary action, and in the future, we will need more. On behalf of Turkey, I believe all of the contracting parties will support the more cooperation, more collaboration in the region. At this point, I have to say that under the scope of the Barcelona Convention, we have lots of great efforts, successful studies. I want to mention one. That we have in Antalya last year. We approved a decision named Sulfur Emission Control Area, and we designated whole Mediterranean as SECA. So I would like to thank you at this point, first to the Secretariat and to the other contracting parties for this great decision. It is also a decision that will contribute in the long term to the climate change. We should also need to integrate climate change related policy objectives to all elements to UNEP MAP system. I would also stress that in accordance with the sustainable development policies within the framework of the principle of shared but differentiated responsibilities and Turkey's special circumstances in order to achieve our global targets. It's very important in terms of the climate change especially. So now I would like to say some thing about the circular economy studies that will also contribute to the climate change mitigation. It's other circular economy approach. Turkey is taking important step on the way of circular economy at this point, a zero waste based approach. These zero waste includes a subdivision named Zero Waste Blue Movement. The links that I mentioned about circular economy and marine environment before, this is already have been implemented, and one of our explanatory waste prevention project under the auspices of our First Lady, Madam Emine Erdoğan. At this point, contributing in a meaningful way to respond to climate change crisis at the regional and global level has always a priority as a whole by the waste and by the other aspects of Turkey. Now, I would like to thank you, our valuable panelists, for their time and contribution. And I have to mention that we have the last side event of the Met Pavilion, and I guess the last event of the COP. Yeah, thank you very much. I also followed the side events of the Met Pavilion. Thank you very much for these great explanations and side events that you've performed. Thank you all of the people give contribution. And thank you very much to you for your participation. Now, by relevance, we can move through the question and the answer part. If you have some questions, comments, and contributions, we would be glad to answer them. Please.
Thank you very much. I come from Cyprus, but I live in Zimbabwe. But my question is coming from the faith communities, from the WCC in Geneva. In the last presentation of the report about the commitments of the countries after the Paris Global Agreement, we can see that the countries who they did nothing in 2021, they are countries who increase their spending on military activities, like United States, like Russia. But also in Mediterranean, we realize that this finger is going up and up. Do you think that this is a risk for more available funds or climate change action? And the second point, the Intergovernmental Scientific Commission claim the anthropogenic negative activities in order to have to the point the Secretary General of United Nations to say we are going to ecological catastrophe if we fail to be together, to work together. And the executive of UNEP, she said, we are going to ecological chaos if we fail to be together. And now we know that 80% of earthquakes around the world is from where we interfere to remove anything from the earth. And now there is two developments in Mediterranean. The one, we increase the military spending, and the second one, we are like a maniac to exploit what is under the earth. And we are not thinking about the future generations. We are thinking how our generation to get everything, and without thinking about our grandchildren, we risk one day to get a bottle of oxygen to survive as we use today the mask for the coronavirus. So I would like the members here of the panelists to see if there is any risk when our priority is not to have support for your initiative here. Thank you.
It's quite difficult to respond to your questions and concerns. I agree with your concerns. I mean, the more we spend on the arms, the less we will get to protect the marine environment or the environment. This is the right thing to say so, but this is the reality in the world. Now, just because of the war between Russia and Ukraine, for example, it's quite difficult to state that the realization of Paris Agreement or Paris Convention is getting endangered. So this is the reason. I mean, I hope that the peace is going to be the reality in the world in future. Otherwise, then, from my point of view, we need to approach the environment, especially marine environment, on a global basis. So, from my point of view, environment belongs to everybody, every nation, every people in the world. So, not only for us, but also for the future generations as well. So, any pollution in any part of the world affects the other parts of the world. So, we need to accept our obligations or to protect the environment in such a way as to cooperate to each other. I mean, that's all I would like to say. I mean, I understand your concerns. It's the same concerns, I have the same, so it's okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karan. Yeah, thank you very much again for your participation. Thank you.